The year 1998 for the Minnesota Vikings and 2024 hold a lot of similarities. In both of those years, you have a starting quarterback who a lot of people thought at that point were done. In 1998, Randall Cunningham was in his second season post-retirement, and after a first year where he really wasn't even close to a shell of himself, he looked like he was a player that was done with the NFL. But he came back, had an incredible 1998, and the Minnesota Vikings offensively in 98 boasted a offense with 2,000-yard receivers. They had a 1,000-yard running back, and they were a 15-1 team. Now, how does that compare to 2024? Well, the Minnesota Vikings in 2024, they had a 14-3 record. They had a QB in Sam Darnold, who a lot of people thought was done being a starting quarterback in the NFL. 2,000-yard receivers and a 1,000-yard running back behind them as well. Now, it's not necessarily the same. Jordan Addison didn't have 1,000 yards this year. I am rounding up a bit, but 875 between Jefferson and Jordan Addison, a little over 2,400 yards, so I'm just going to call it 2,000-yard seasons. But both of these seasons for the Vikings ended in not really similar fashion. In 1998, the Minnesota Vikings made it to the conference championship game where they lost 27-30 against the Atlanta Falcons, a Falcons team who was actually very good that year as well. But in 2024, the Minnesota Vikings lost to a LA Rams team who, I'll admit, the Rams were good last year. They probably put up the best fight of anybody against the Philadelphia Eagles on Philly's route to the Super Bowl last year. But Minnesota, I wouldn't call them front runners. I wouldn't even say that they're a team that was worse than their 14-3 record. I would just say that this was a team that somewhat proved throughout the season they were really good at beating bad teams. They were even really good at beating average teams. But when it came their time to beat the teams that were really good or teams that at that moment were really hot in the season, they couldn't do it very easily. Now again, 14 wins, that's nothing to scoff at. But some of the wins aren't very good looking either. I mean, there's a 6-point win against the Jets. There's a 5-point win against the Jaguars. There's a 3-point win against the Bears, a 1-point win against the Cardinals, 3-point win against the Seahawks. But then you have your 2 games against Detroit where you lose, one of them by 22 points, and another game in LA in the regular season where you lose by double digits as well. And then obviously the playoff loss that I alluded to earlier, they got beat 27-9. Now, the year in general, I think Minnesota kind of stumbled in to a really great year from Sam Darnold. And where you do have a lot of hope for this team, and where you do think that going from Sam Darnold to JJ McCarthy can still be a successful team, is the fact that this was a really good offensive line. And it was an offensive line that proved that if they stayed healthy, if they blocked like they're capable of, and they proved that if they do their job, and if they have somebody playing quarterback that's just competent, if Sam Darnold was Patrick Mahomes, I have no doubt in my mind Minnesota might have gone 17-0. They probably would have ran the table and won the Super Bowl, and this would be considered one of the greatest teams of all time. But with Sam Darnold, they just were really good. And that's not a bad thing at all. Even though, as much as I'm making it kind of sound like, it's not a bad thing at all what they did last year. But again, they proved going to JJ McCarthy is... as much as we don't want to give JJ McCarthy credit for not playing in 2024, he still looks like he could be a good quarterback in the NFL. And being behind that offensive line, throwing to the targets he has, and handing off to the running back room that they have, there's a really good chance that Minnesota is as good as they were last year, if not better, not just from a record standpoint, but from a standpoint of how dominant can this team actually be. Now, it's not just Sam Darnold that's going to be a different face at a position for the Minnesota Vikings this year. You also have a lot of really good players that left during free agency or through trades. Garrett Bradbury, Cam Bynum. A lot of snaps and a lot of talent are leaving the Minnesota Vikings from 2024 to 2025. However, there are some decent players, actually some really good players, when you consider Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave are both coming to the Minnesota Vikings. You also are able to make some good moves in re-signing guys. You bring back Aaron Jones to be your running back. You bring back Byron Murphy and Harrison Smith. And overall, you keep this somewhat of a semblance of last year's team. But again, this is a roster that's going to look a lot different. And we'll be relying on a lot of different players, both offensively and defensively, from where they were in 2024. In the draft this year, there really wasn't a lot for Minnesota to do. They did have a first-round pick in Donovan Jackson, an offensive lineman from Ohio State, who at this point, like I said, the offensive line for Minnesota last year was really good, was probably their best group outside of their pass rush last year, but you're building strength on strength, and while I do think there's maybe a cornerback or two that they could have gone after, or maybe a running back to kind of supplement Aaron Jones, even though they did technically trade for Jordan Mason, but basically signed him from San Francisco. I think there maybe was a bit more value that could have been had from Minnesota at that number 24 overall pick. But again, Donovan Jackson, he's going to come in. You hope that with the losses of Garrett Bradbury and Cam Robinson, who was taking over for Christian Darrisaw after Darrisaw tore his ACL, again, you just hope that Donovan Jackson is coming in, helping replace what Minnesota lost in free agency. Looking at what the offense is going to look like, there's two more offensive free agents that I did not get to yet because I kind of felt like they're more important to talk about as a whole for the offense for Minnesota. That's the additions of Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. Again, slotting in with Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw. They also have backups at offensive line and guys like Justin School and Blake Brandel. Brandel played 100% of snaps for this team last year, so you know that that's a guy at the interior offensive line spot that you can heavily rely on if one of Fries or Jackson go down. And again, this is going to be a team that's highly reliant upon the fact that, yes, they don't have a quarterback that I think they feel, as much as they want to say it, I don't know if they feel 1,000% that JJ McCarthy is the franchise going forward, but they have an offense in front of him. They have targets in front of him, and they add with guys like Tim Jones and Rondale Moore to be, backup players for this team. Those are two pretty good backup players, and you have a good running game. This is exactly what you want to have for basically a rookie quarterback going into his second year, having the chance to really succeed. Defensively, I don't really know what to expect because this feels like they were really good last year. They added guys like Blake Cashman, Andrew Van Ginkel. They added a lot of talent to this defense, but I do think a lot of the reason that this team was so good defensively because the guy calling the shots for them was doing an incredible job at it. I mean, he was putting guys in different places. He was putting guys in places to be successful. And these guys were incredible last year. Not only at just getting after the quarterback, forcing turnovers. They were top 5, I believe, in terms of limiting the run. And they made a better front line of their defense. I mean, you add Jonathan Allen, you add Javon Hargrave, and you add Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins in the 5th round of the draft this year, a guy that you hope, it's like any of these later draft picks, you just hope that he's able to add something to this team. You still obviously have Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Grenard, and Andrew Van Ginkel. And in your secondary, I think this is where this team is going to get got a lot. Currently, through our lads, it shows Byron Murphy being the nickelback. I don't know how long that's I don't know how long that's going to last. They bring in Isaiah Rodgers and they bring in Jeff Okudah, but the chances that both of these guys are the starting corners for the Minnesota Vikings by the end of Week 18, I would put at like a 5% chance. Now, you do have Josh Metellus and Harrison Smith in the back end, but again, this probably is where this team is going to be, it's going to be where this team loses some games. Because when you're going against Detroit twice a year with Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, and whoever else ends up stepping up, or you're going against Chicago with DJ Moore, or you're going against Green Bay with just the 12 wide receiver twos that they have, this is going to be where Minnesota loses some games, especially probably later in the year, and especially if somebody on the front seven goes down, or if just the front seven isn't performing very well. This is where I have a little bit of, I guess, pessimism that this team might not be a 14-win team again. As far as the schedule goes, this is a pretty tough schedule. You have 2 games in the first 5 weeks where you're playing overseas. You're playing in Ireland, and then you're playing in London. Then you go on bye, and you come back to play Philly, the Chargers, the Lions, Baltimore, and Chicago. And that's not even getting into the fact that the first 5 weeks, they play decent teams every single week. They really don't have a cakewalk at all. I don't love this schedule at all if I'm the Minnesota Vikings. First, and our bye week at week 6, I will always hate that. An early bye week, I will always hate that. I would rather have it week 11 or 12 just to kind of, get a little bit more healthy towards the end of the year. But that's probably just my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong. But through and through, this schedule is tough. You don't get until maybe week 16 against the New York Giants, where I'd probably guarantee a win. And even that game on the road, that's a tough one as well. So, honestly, a floor for this team, if things go wrong, they're probably going to go wrong early. And we're probably going to find out pretty quickly whether or not JJ McCarthy is really going to be the replacement for Sam Darnold. And replacement for Sam Darnold or not, we're going to find out if he's a good quarterback. We're going to find out if he's a guy that can actually win games in the NFL. We're going to find that out pretty quickly. So floor for this team, 5-12, 6-11. Ceiling for this team, if things stay well, if they're able to get after the quarterback again, if they're able to limit the run, if offensively they can stay competent, they'll win 11 games just off of how talented they are on offense and how soundly they play on defense. Again, this team turns the other team over and they limit the run. If there's 2 things you want to do to guarantee that you're going to win football games, it's those 2 things. And they did it at an elite level last year. But they have to stay elite at doing that. I don't really think that's going to happen with how different and how much worse, in my opinion, this secondary is. And I mentioned earlier, Brian Flores did an incredible job at calling the shots for this defense, making it so guys were in positions to succeed and putting them all over the field. If teams are able to pick up on it, they're going to be going against really smart teams in 2025. Not to say that there's, dumb teams in the NFL, but you're playing Philly. You're playing the Lions twice, obviously. You're playing the Packers twice, obviously. You're playing Baltimore. You're playing the Commanders. You're playing the Chargers. You're not playing a bad schedule by any stretch of the imagination. You're getting one of the most difficult schedules in the NFL. And if they cannot be elite again on defense, they're not going to get anywhere near double-digit wins.